Ongi etorri Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Azkuna zentroko letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Jarraian, dolua sormen izeneko solasaldia izango da 3 ahotsetan. Hedoi Etxarte, Uxue Razquin eta Lur Olaizolarekin.
Bueno, arratsaldeon, ongi etorri denok, eta, pare bat egin.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to make a couple of comments before we start this talk. We've got Hedoi, Etxarte, Uxue, Razquin y Lur Olaizola. Lur, she's a filmmaker. Uxue and Hedoi are writers. They will talk about grief, about grieving as a way of creating. It will be a 40-minute talk, and then we'll be able to watch a short film by Lur. I think it's the 8th time it's been screened here. So 40 minutes talk, and then we will be able to watch his this short film. Well, good afternoon. We were asking ourselves how should we start talking about creation and grieving. So we thought we maybe should sort of position our work within the framework of grief. With my short film variations that we will be watching later, in my particular case, my dad died on January 6, 2 years ago. And when reviewing my notes, in order to see when I started creating this short film, if my dad died on the 6th, on April the 17th, I had some notes on my diary, because sometimes I write a diary, and then I saw a note that very same year, some months later after my father passed away. And then I realized that I wrote something about my dad, about his nails. And once I wrote that note, I realized that maybe that was the seed for a documentary or for a short film. I was telling Uxue and Hedoi that my dad's passing away changed my life forever. And then you realize you're sort of aiming towards a different place in your life. So I was really eager to start doing fiction films. So I think these two things sort of got together, and that was the starting point for me to create variations, this short film. Well, at the end of November, my book was published, Izan baten promesak, at Susa, publishing house. And same as you, I was talking about a non-fiction novel. I don't know whether it was right to call it in such a way. In fact, people would come and talk about my book, ask me whether things that were in the book were real or not, and I would tell them, well, this is a narrative. It's a narrative artifact that I use. The book was published some 5 years after Aitor died. And when I had to write the book, I used some other books, like one book of a trans person, And there, for example, there's like a rule, and according to that rule, a trans writer should not write about transition once 5 years have not sort of gone by. And I think this rule sort of shows what's behind the rule, that they're there and they're bound not to be respected.
Aitor hil aurretik. Oso nabarmen ospital.
So maybe this book started being writing before he passed away, because I had this kind of like an epiphany moment when I was convinced when he got into hospital that he was going to die, that I thought would die, and people around us would tell us, no, well, no, of course, don't think that. That's not the right reaction. Don't take it like that. I think that was the seed of my writing on my story. Sometimes I've got the feeling that people that surround us, people that sort of love us, with them, we're kind of already producing a tale before a tragic event does happen. And sometimes I've got things in mind, and then I don't sort of translate them into writing, and sometimes it's the other way around. So when did I start writing? Well, I couldn't tell really, because sometimes the last version is very similar to the work that's being published, but I rewrite a lot. There are 27 chapters in the book. And then in some of the chapters, I would talk about the things that were around us. I mean, on the even chapters. And there I talk about the city of Pamplona in the 70s and the surroundings. And then on the odd chapters, it's kind of my monologues. I mean, the conversations I had with my dad and some other things that I consider were relevant, also relevant to what was described on the even chapters. How do you say goodbye to a mom? That's a book that was published last year, and it took me 7 years to write it. Sometimes I felt like writing, some other times I didn't feel like writing at all, and sometimes I was sort of just writing after my souvenirs, and it is quite painful to think about all that. And in this book, How to Say Goodbye to a Mom, I wanted to talk about her disease, cancer, about her death, and about my grieving process. I've done this from a statistical point of view in a very fragmented way. Yeah, I like to do things that are fragmented. And then when I decided to write about this subject matter, I thought it was the right way to do it. The story itself gave me a voice and a structure. So I started writing on notebooks, because for me, writing is always about collecting tragic or painful things. In fact, it's always allowed me to face these type of situations. And then there was this kind of serendipity moment when I realized I could do something with the things I had on my notebooks. So then I changed my mind and I said I can write a book. And then I thought about undertaking a literary exercise that is with my mom's disease and death, and also to manage my grief. So that's what I've been doing for 7 years.
Kontatzen nik irakurri ditut bai Edoien liburua, bai.
Yeah, I've read both books. I highly advise them to read them, by the way. But it's curious because Uxue's book, I read it some time ago, and now I reread it, and it made me cry. I mean, you've mentioned that now you started writing when she was already sick, and I think that pain shows in the book, sort of is embodied in the book. And sometimes lately some books take me to life, to my real life, and I am moved by life. And that was the case with Hedoi's book, and those conversations he had with his friends and his father's friends. There he talks about that community in Pamplona in the 70s. So I thought it was very nice to reread this book, and these two books have taken me to very different places. What were your references in order to write these books? A month after my mom passed away, I found John Didiott's book, The Year of Magical Thinking. And that book was very hard for me, but I always try, when I approach literature, for me it's something that will help me know what I feel. And maybe I am trying to find out whether somebody has felt something similar and then is describing it with words. So that was a hard book to read for me, and it was very important too. And then when writing, I sort of take a look at other books. And funny enough, when the book was finished and published, I think Hedoi, he published his diary on grieving. And I liked that diary that Hedoi was telling us to read, advising us to read. And as I said previously, the feeling is there, and I think it's fine. I mean, when you identify yourself with that process, and that so I found it with Bartis.
Nire kasuan, horrela, aldameneko liburu horiek sailkatzerakoan, agian molde diferentetako liburuak ziren, ez? Ziren batzuk.
So when I've been reading books, these are different type of books. On the one hand, Izen baten promesa is quite similar to the book by a communist called The Daughter of a Communist. The dad was the communist for Eastern Europe that then moved to the United States. And it's quite a peculiar book because then the daughter found some material, some reports against the dad during the McCarthy period, and it really lets you know what it was like to be a communist under the McCarthy regimes. And also I was interested by other books and all these thanks to my friend Ruben. So some of these books are not really about grieving, but have been written when the author was grieving, though. The first time I read a certain book, that it was about photography. Yeah, is searching for a photo of a man that just passed away, and same on the Dreams book by Freud. I mean, when he lost his dad, he feels the absence, and that is why he wrote the book. I mean, clearly enough, it is not to produce a theory on dreams. So those books were inspirational to me. And then there were some others, like the idea of a will. I mean, just in case I die, I've already sort of have everything well planned and organized. And from this point of view, I thought, well, you have to pick up things that you got from my tour when you were young. Then a collection of Bast tales, John's, Mirandi's books. Which books are more important? Well, the books my dad let me. So I needed books written in Basque language that I felt close to. Poetry books, but also narrative books as well. So there was material for construction. Then there was Tecoac and Gari Tagaraldiasco. 2 books about graving, and another book that is an exercise in order to regain your souvenirs, your memory. Then I had also the books Aitor read when he was young on politics and arts, and then some other books about politics on the 70s. So that was the book that were inspirational to me when I was writing. Well, there we see images and text. Yes, been reconsidering this because so far I did not really think of it. So in my short film, I've got to say that everything happens in a workshop where the books are put together. In a binding workshop. I mean, there is a film by Michael Hurst, Les Sentiments de l'été. It's not very well known, but I fell in love with the images because the film starts in an art school. It was shot in 17 millimeters, and when I had in mind my short film, then I watched it again, and it is a film about graving. On the first in the screen we see the art school, a girl that dies, and that is what kicks the film off. So I went back to that film without really knowing that it was about graving. And then another reference was a book. I mean, these also take us to what you have in your mind, in your subconscious mind. Like John Berger's book. It is here, this book. This is a song for Beverly. And Eve's the son did the drawings. And when I wrote this book years ago, I've got to say there's also a very fragmented book like Uxue's. There's a certain moment when he talks about the woman's clothing, and when I read this, and my dad was still there, was still alive, and that really moved me because the clothing, the garments. I mean, when somebody dies, what do you do with their clothes? I mean. And that is something that is mentioned in the book. What do you do with the clothes of the person that you loved? And I think in some subconscious way, clothes are also very important in my short film. There is a jumper that used to belong to my dad, and then there is the love story told by a teacher to a student, and then the coat is the main actor. So these are some of the things that were inspirational for me. Then in my short film also, there is this reflection that is very interesting, and it comes from Paris, Texas by Wim Wenders. Then I was shooting a short film. So there you have music, the soundtrack, and the image. Because though you asked me previously, there were the Bach's variations that play an important role in this short film. And this enables us to talk about fiction and non-fiction, because I usually say this is fiction, but then Uxue said, but the words you use are yours, yes. And then there is this Goldberg's variation that my dad used to really like, and this is what I played. I sat and played the piano during my dad's burial. Even though then I say this is fictional. How about your experience? Yes, that sort of struck my attention, because as we will see later in your short film, you mentioned the starting point for your short film. It was something very specific that is an anecdote. We will see it later. And I kept that in mind. And you've mentioned fiction, yes. But why fiction? Well, because there are actors and some other decisions, like on aesthetics, when producing the scenes. So that is why it is fictional. And in my particular case, I felt very much at ease with this autobiographic text. And I've realized that also non-fiction text, they required an effort, same as fiction books, because you have to make a decision. What is the voice you're going to decide to use to tell the story? What decisions are you going to make? What's going to be in the book, out of the book? And I felt very much at ease, and I did this in a very conscious way. And I also ask this from writers. Something is that you make something up, that you have imagination, and imagination is a key element. Everything I'm telling is true in my particular case. So I work from my souvenirs, but that gets you where it gets you. But then there is also work based on your imagination. Imagination was also fundamental in order to do this exercise, because there were some decisions that had to be made, and the elements that I had to use were narrative elements. So sometimes there's this duality. It seems like you have to work harder when it is fiction, but when it is not non-fiction, you also have to make decisions like what are you telling, what are you not telling, and so on.
Elkarrizketak eta gero zuretik gehiago dagoena, ez? Egiten dituzuna hausnarketak ere bai. Hor
And I think in the case of Lure also, I see there is literary intention. Well, there was non-fiction, and then when we took it to printing, then that was a bit of an issue. When we sort of ask ourselves, how would we display that? This is related with the socialization of the book, because first you have to consider whether it's got a literary value, but then there was this triangle, 2 allies and 1 enemy. The art historian, because the history expert. So this was about the Pamplona, sociology of the people that were the communists in between the 72 and the 80. And then another book, but with a different title, different results, and then there was also the novel writer that should be one of the allies. But then you start interviewing people. For example, Alex. That character is inspired by somebody that let me very clear. He did not want me to reveal his age, his true name, or once I bump into this person and I told him, do you know how am I going to name you? And he was like, no, wait, don't tell me. So, well, that is something that you keep for yourself forever. So I think it was interesting that when I was doing the interviews, it was not that interesting what they were telling me. Because they had their own expectations. They were not very long, those interviews, because they would tell me, go here, go there. Then somebody... I don't know, somebody would tell me when they killed the Carrero Blanco, well, I was here or there. Then when there was this strike, I was here. So Alex, for example, for 2 hours, he explained to me that there were some conferences done by the Communist League, and he gave me many details. So some things in these interviews were very interesting, but most of them were not. So I did not put everything in the book. And I made 2 exceptions with Xavi and Pachi, 2 very well-known people. One is the chairman of the Basque Association. So I could remove some things as a journalist, but I could not really write literature, because if they were saying something wonderful about a certain architect like Moneo, I could not say the opposite. And then with the others, I had that kind of agreement. So the idea was that people would not know who was behind them really. And then some people would sort of recognize some of the characters, and I was like, no, you do not.
Sarritan, muntaiaia da ariketa bat oso basatia. Ze lehen testamentua aipatu dugu, baina norbaite...
So then putting all this together is quite difficult. Because there is this... subject, the will, the testament, and somebody they have think that if somebody thinks they have to tell you things that are important, and then they make decisions, and then you start recording, then you decide whether this is going to be kept or I'm going to remove this. So then you have to sort of make a choice. that gives me information about the period and about the people. Then you also get people's opinion on certain subjects. So that duality, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, that is something that came afterwards. And it was not very comfortable because it was Nadia by André Breton, the most inspirational book for me. It was published many years ago by the publishing house Gallimard. And I mean, it is a whole novel, and there are many witnesses telling their story. It was like André Breton felt in love with that woman the day he met her. So I don't know whether he felt kind of compelled.
Fikzioa,
I think we're missing Lou's answer. Fiction, non-fiction. I would like to ask you something, if I may. Because you may perhaps have read her book already. It's very fragmented, but towards the end, there's a more sustained passage. And I'd like to ask you about that change of pace. The moment you read the end, it's like an earthquake. Yes, that's the effect I was looking for, because it was clear to me in my mind that it had to be a fragmented and fragmenting piece of work, but I had quite a number of doubts regarding how I would wrap it up and finish it. I knew what I wanted to share. My ideas were in order. Order here is very important. And I had like my table of contents, pain, death. I had my structure, but I was missing the end. Irati Turitsa told me, you need to make the most of the moment, seize the moment to tell your mom what it is you want to tell her. And that gave me guidance. I, up until then, was following, a specific scheme. And this recommendation, rocked those foundations. It was hard for me. And that meant that I was going to introduce a more oral style, verbal style. Each time I was writing, I would read what I was writing out loud, and that, pained me because many memories came to my mind. References to cemetery. I mentioned that I had never met my grandma Edurne. And reading it out was a very painful experience, but this morning, as I have experienced, has a logical end. Everything that you've kept inside will fade away, little by little, fragment after fragment. And this was exactly what happened to me at the end of the book, that it faded out. Earlier we were saying that we knew clearly the perspective from which we wanted to narrate the short film. We had the text as the starting point. That's why I'm going to describe it. But in your case, what's the starting point of your book? From what distance? From what perspective? Have you shortened that distance once you have finished the book or the short film? Have we shortened the distance vis-a-vis that which has already happened? I already said that some months after the event, I started writing what would end up becoming the short film. There's something that is revealed and that is surfaces in the short film that I connect to the first months of mourning. And my feeling was that I was saying my dad over and over again. I was looking at faces and I thought, oh my God, it's him. It's not him. And fortunately, that same effect is something that I haven't felt. But during the first months of mourning, this was very common. And this is something that I tried to portray during the short film, the first months of the mourning process. I want to showcase what happened to me. As regards my dad, Pedro, you mentioned something similar earlier, but in this case, your book establishes a close link to your dad's youth. You engage in a direct dialogue with your mom. My dad isn't present in my short film. It's not like a connection between Pedro and myself. It's rather rude to channel the morning of the first month. So there's no distance for me because from the very onset, he isn't there in the short film. It's just me. My case is different in my opinion. Yeah, some days ago, in an interview, an author that had written a morning said that death is like staring at the sun. On the one hand, we have that feeling. We feel overwhelmed. And I don't want to attach a great importance to nature. But there's something the author said, which is the fact that the publishing house was like a cloud. And the publisher said, if you read this book, you know who this person was. But then in the interviews, even during the monologues, as with La Liga y La Encrucijada, in the interviews, when someone starts talking about someone who has passed away, well, those moments are full of intentionality, of emotions, and that doesn't have value in literary terms. Those are the most beautiful words that we dedicate to an individual. But as Ruben was saying, you cannot write someone as tall. No, you need to describe it differently. You need to give it a literary touch and produce an image, describe an action. And it's really hard to talk about the person that had passed away. Mackenzie Borgen said something that was very useful regarding post-transition. This author said, well, before this was a strange, weird man, and now I'm a trans woman. And what happened? The narrative that I had regarding myself in the past, what I believed about me, about myself, doesn't match whom I am today. So this narrating exercise can prove useful to choose. It's a choice. It can be an interested choice, a whim. And in my case, I dare say it's a conscious choice. Who are you inviting to participate in the book and the testimonials? Who will be left outside? I, for example, deliberately left some people out of my book. Others are portrayed in the book. What is the impact ultimately of these decisions? The League of the Communists is the best league. The league that was most open. And should I have to choose other profiles, well, my work would have been very different. Or even the people, the real people hidden behind characters tell things. But when we talk about distance, I believe that distance in my book is even greater. It's maintained or greater because there's no retrospective saying that someone told me this about this other person. What about you, Uxue? What's your take on this? Well, my relationship with my mom was extremely close. I was the youngest of her children, and you could tell. As regards her disease, when I wrote on this in my book, my feeling was that I was getting closer to her. Not as Hedoi has described. The exercise you described is hard because our fathers and mothers, well, we didn't meet them, of course, when they were young. And, well, the interviews are heroic. You don't know whom you're going to encounter. And perhaps in this search, you can get closer to your dad, to the Aitol in the book. In my specific case, it's been highly emotional. When I was writing, I felt her very, close to me. And that's why I ask you whether you have felt an epiphany when writing the book or drafting the script for the short film. I have felt this proximity, this closeness. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in the afterworld. But I must acknowledge that I have had these moments of epiphany, and the fact that I was writing got me closer to my mom's image, metaphorically and symbolically. Have you experienced something similar while writing? Well, in the creative process, I would say no. Answer would be no. Well, something has happened to me, but it's something different, but it's quite personal. I've decided that I want to continue talking to my dad. This is part of the mourning process for me. I've told him about the short film. This has, gotten me closer to him. Maybe this is a side thought and I'm not answering your question. In my case, it wasn't an epiphany, but rather a connection with the rational side. With Ada Rodriguez's tale, she generates a narrative. And one of the main topics of the book is misunderstandings, misconceptions. And the misunderstandings are and part of the learning process. Well, most of the time we're not really grasping everything well. We're not understanding things well. We see things differently. This is extremely interesting as applied to other processes. In the case of literary processes, these don't affect us. But with the excuse of the book, when I knew myself, that in Ñuñaría, in the 30s, there were Trotskyists, and in the 60s, I was very much in shock because once again, I was judging from my position in 2025. How is it possible to have Trotsky advocates then? How can everything be so interconnected, considering that 100 years have passed by? When writing my book, I was talking to people, and you see that in the 1972 encounters, which are extremely interesting and contradictory in Pamplona, but then someone 100 years ago was able to think something of such relevance in Pamplona. It's such a remote place in a small province. Well, blew my mind away, to be honest. And perhaps nowadays it's harder to find something as intense. But it has indeed happened. Thanks very much to all three of you. Round of applause, please.
Eta bukatu haindik, orain pelikula.
Well, we still haven't finished. Now we're gonna share the short film. Enjoy.